So I've been working on this issue since about 2010. I'm interested in how citizens can be better included in SRM research. And what I'm going to do in these 5 minutes is briefly go through the environmental justice dimensions of SRM, and then talk about some ways it is a unique prospect from the ethical challenges of climate change itself. Environmental ethicists talk about 5 justice dimensions. First, there's the matter of distributive justice, which relates to how harms and benefits and also risks are shared among people. Second, there's procedural justice, which refers to how decisions are made and if they're made fairly. This relates to questions of transparency, democracy, public participation, and also how to appeal decisions. Because it's not just the people living now that the decision to embark upon SRM concerns, but also future people and non-humans, consent may be impossible. Third, there's recognitive justice, which relates to acknowledging people's distinct identities and histories, from ethnicity to gender and more. It's a part of procedural justice, and for example, it's assumed that SRM might arise from a negotiation among nation states. But many indigenous peoples and other groups are already not adequately represented by national governments, which is important to recognize. And at present, most research into SRM is done using models that aren't right now capable of the spatial granularity to recognize particular people, their needs and desires, and how they might be impacted. That poses a challenge to recognitive justice, which interdisciplinary work might be able to address to some degree. Fourth, there's intergenerational justice, which refers to equity between present and future generations. And fifth, there's interspecies justice, which is particularly relevant here, as SRM implies that one species is going to intervene in the energy flows of the whole Earth system. Of course, you could say that climate change is already causing extinctions and stress on ecosystems, and what if SRM helps to counter that? But SRM doesn't help with ocean acidification. So it might theoretically help forms of land life while conditions continue to worsen for ocean life. One important point when considering the ethics of SRM is that the ethics don't necessarily inhere inside the technology. How the technology is used and by whom is really important. There's a varying spectrum of ethical and unethical choices about how it may be used or how it may be researched. So what makes this topic unique, distinct from the social and ethical issues posed by climate change in general? I'd like to mention 6 things. Firstly, there's moral hazard, which is a term that originates in economics. And it's the idea that efforts in geoengineering could lead to reduced effort in mitigation and adaptation because of the incorrect belief that geoengineering offers insurance against climate change. Secondly, there's the idea of the technological fix. SRM brings up assumptions about the human relationship with nature, including the idea that humans have a right to control or intervene in the flow of energy. There are 3 important critiques here. First, that a technological fix looks through the world through the lens of resources and places human desires at the center of things. Second, there's the idea that the technological fix is hubristic. And third, that it might be a workaround to avoid social and behavioral change when it is most needed. Thirdly, there's intentionality. Some believe that because SRM is deliberate, it has different ethical implications. Fourthly, there's the termination problem and cessation mechanisms, like Andy mentioned. It's unique among emerging technologies that SRM is intended to be finite. The idea is that it would be done temporarily until emissions are reduced. However, how do you design a system to be temporary? Who decides when to terminate the program? And that requires a lot more consideration. Fifthly, there are issues around technological lock-in and path dependency. By that I mean the idea that large research programs, private and public, create institutions that might support SRM deployment. And 6, there's challenges around compensation. It would be very difficult to design a compensation mechanism for people harmed by SRM deployment, in part because attributing events to SRM versus other climate changes would be technically difficult. There's different principles about who would pay, the polluter pays, ability to pay, beneficiary pays, etc. But economic compensation would likely be inadequate because if people suffer death or cultural loss, that can't be easily remunerated. So there's a lot more that I hope we can discuss later in the workshop. I'll just wrap up by saying that when it comes to ethics, ethical analysis is not an add-on to scientific research, which comes after the scientists have done their work. It should be embedded in the scientific process itself at all different stages and inform how models work and how research questions are asked. And I hope we can all work towards that here. Thank you.